What if the greatest tragedy of your life was a lie? What if the person you trusted most was the architect of your deepest pain? This is a story about a gilded cage, a forgotten photograph, and a secret so profound it shattered a family and exposed a truth that had been buried for 5 long years. Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of a devastating betrayal and the unstoppable power of a mother's love. Chloe lived a life many would envy. Her home was a sprawling condo overlooking Lincoln Park in Chicago, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city's glittering skyline. Her husband Mark was a high-powered real estate developer, a man whose ambition was as vast as the views from their living room. They had a bright, beautiful 10-year-old daughter, Lily. But beneath the polished surface, Chloe felt a growing emptiness. Years ago, she'd been a promising photojournalist, her lens capturing the raw, unfiltered stories of the city. But Mark had convinced her to give it up. "A man like me needs a wife at home," he'd said. The biggest shadow in her life, however, was the loss of their second child, a boy named Arthur, who they were told had died from complications just hours after birth 5 years ago. It was a wound that never truly healed, a silent grief that echoed in the quiet corners of their perfect home. The morning began like any other. The sun cast long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Mark was already gone, a ghost who left before dawn and returned long after dusk. His presence was marked only by the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and a half-empty coffee mug on the marble countertop. As Chloe cleaned up, her eyes fell on his second phone, the one he claimed was just for work, lying on the kitchen island. He'd never forgotten it before. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Lately, he'd been more distant than ever, his excuses for late nights becoming increasingly vague. A simple, gnawing curiosity turned into an irresistible urge. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. She knew his passcode. It was Lily's birthday. The screen unlocked, revealing a single, unread text message from an unsaved number. "Cafe Taza, 9 p.m. Don't be late." Her heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't a business meeting. Not at 9 p.m. The casual intimacy of the message felt like a physical blow, confirming a suspicion she hadn't dared to voice. A cold wave of dread washed over her. She decided to drive his phone to his office in the Loop, a plausible excuse to see his reaction. The drive down Lakeshore Drive was a blur of blue water and gleaming steel, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Mark's secretary, a young woman with a practiced bright smile, offered her coffee. "He's in a tense meeting with some investors," she whispered conspiratorially. Chloe waited, the sleek leather of the chair in the reception area, feeling cold and unwelcoming. For nearly an hour she heard nothing but the hushed hum of the office. Then muffled, angry voices erupted from behind the heavy oak door. A moment later, 2 stern-faced men in suits stormed out, their faces grim. Chloe took a deep breath and entered. Mark was standing by the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with anger. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice sharp as he turned. The irritation in his eyes was unmistakable. "You forgot your phone," she said softly, holding it out. "I thought you might need it." His expression flickered, a brief flash of panic before the mask of composure slipped back into place. "Ha, thanks. I didn't even realize," he mumbled, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It's been one of those days." He seemed to be avoiding her eyes, a subtle shift she'd never noticed before. "Will you be home early tonight? I was thinking of making that salmon you like," she offered. A test. He shook his head, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "No, sorry. I've got a mountain of work to get through. These deals are at a critical stage. It's going to be another late one." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. The words hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Her heart sank. The first crack in the foundation of their life had just appeared, and she knew with a chilling certainty that it ran deeper than she could imagine. As she left his office, the image of that text message burned in her mind. Cafe Taza, 9 p.m. The city outside, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets. She decided then and there she wouldn't be making salmon. She would be going to that cafe. She had to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. To escape the suffocating silence of the condo, Chloe grabbed her old camera, a Canon that felt like a relic from another life, and headed to Lincoln Park. Photography had once been her language, her way of making sense of the world. Now it was just a way to kill time, to distract herself from the countdown to 9 p.m. The spring air was fragrant with the scent of blossoming cherry trees and damp earth. She focused her lens on the vibrant life around her. Children chasing pigeons, a young couple laughing on a bench, the dazzling white sails of boats on the lake. For a few moments, the familiar weight of the camera in her hands made her feel like herself again. Then she saw him, a small boy, no older than 5, with a shock of blonde hair and a mischievous smile, was chasing a bright red ball across the grass. There was a joyful, carefree energy about him that drew her in. She raised her camera instinctively and captured the moment he tripped, tumbling harmlessly onto the grass before bursting into laughter. It was a perfect shot, full of life and innocence. "Are you a real photographer?" a small voice piped up beside her. Chloe lowered her camera and saw the little boy standing there, looking up at her with wide, curious blue eyes. "No, honey, I just do it for fun," she replied with a smile. "My name's Leo." He announced it with the charming self-importance of a 5-year-old. "What's your name?" "I'm Chloe." She felt an inexplicable pull toward this child, a warmth that spread through her chest. "I took a picture of you," she said, turning the digital screen toward him. "Do you want to see?" He peered at the image of himself laughing on the ground. "That's cool," he exclaimed. "Can I have one? A real one?" His request was so earnest, so sweet. "Of course," Chloe said. "If I see you here again, I'll bring you a print, I promise. Are you here with your mom?" The boy's bright expression clouded over for just a second. "My mom is in heaven," he said matter-of-factly. "I'm with my dad. He's over there working." He pointed a small finger toward a man sitting on a bench, hunched over a laptop, his face etched with exhaustion. Chloe's heart ached for the little boy. An hour later, she printed the photo at a nearby pharmacy. She found Leo again, this time sitting next to his father, who was still absorbed in his work. "I have something for you," she said gently to Leo, handing him the 4x6 print. The boy's face lit up with pure delight. It was then that his father finally looked up. He was a tall man, in his early 40s, with tired eyes and a weary set to his shoulders. When he saw Chloe, his expression immediately hardened. "Dad, look, it's me!" Leo chirped, holding up the photo. The man stood up, his gaze accusatory. "Who are you? Why are you taking pictures of my son?" he demanded, his voice low and hostile. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean any harm," Chloe stammered, taken aback. "He's just a lovely boy, and it was a beautiful moment. I just wanted to give him the picture." "We don't need anything from you," the man said curtly, taking Leo's hand. "Please, leave us alone." He pulled his son away, leaving Chloe standing there, the man's distrust stinging like a slap. She just wanted to do something kind, but his reaction felt deeply personal and profoundly unfair. That evening, Chloe dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple dark dress that would allow her to blend into the shadows. Café Taza was a trendy, dimly lit spot downtown, buzzing with the low hum of conversations and the clinking of glasses. She found a small table in a dark corner, partially hidden by a large potted plant, which gave her a clear view of the entrance. Her hands were cold, her stomach a tight knot of anxiety. Every person who walked through the door sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. At exactly 9 o'clock, a woman entered. She was tall and slender, with sleek dark hair and a confident air that commanded attention. She scanned the room with a look of disdain, before settling at a table by the window. A few minutes later, Mark arrived. Chloe's breath caught in her throat as he walked directly to the woman's table, a familiar, charming smile on his face. He leaned down and kissed her cheek. It wasn't a business meeting. It was a betrayal, unfolding right before her eyes. Chloe felt a wave of nausea, the world tilting on its axis. She watched them, a silent observer of her own life's destruction. He was animated, laughing at something the woman said, the woman whose name she now mentally, venomously labelled the other woman, leaned in close, placing a hand on his arm. The gesture was intimate, proprietary. Chloe's mind reeled. How long had this been going on? The late nights, the business trips, the emotional distance. It all clicked into place, forming a sickening mosaic of deceit. Rage, hot and sharp, mingled with a profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. She wanted to stand up, to march over there and confront them, to shatter their cosy little scene. But her limbs felt heavy, rooted to the spot by the sheer shock of it all. Instead, she did something else. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed Mark's number. She watched as he glanced at his screen, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He pressed a button, declining the call. He silenced his own wife for this woman. The cruelty of it stole her breath. She called again, refusing to be ignored. This time he answered, his voice a low, irritated hiss. "What is it, Chloe? I'm in the middle of a meeting." "A meeting?" she asked, her own voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. "Where are you, Mark? Tell me the truth." There was a pause. She could hear the faint murmur of the cafe's music in the background. "I already told you. I'm at the office. We're in a conference call with the London team. I can't talk right now. I'll be home late." He hung up. Just like that. The line went dead, leaving an echoing silence in her ear. She stared across the room at him as he put his phone away and turned his full attention back to the woman, smiling as if nothing had happened. He was a masterful liar. The realization was like a plunge into icy water. The man she had built her life with, the father of her child, was a complete stranger. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and bitter. Her perfect life was a facade, and it had just crumbled into dust around her. She watched them leave together. He opened the passenger door of his sleek Audi for the woman, a gesture of chivalry that now seemed like a grotesque parody. As they drove off, Chloe's paralysis finally broke. A burning need for answers, for the complete and total truth, propelled her out of the cafe. She hailed a taxi, her voice shaking, as she pointed at the disappearing red tail lights. "Follow that car," she commanded, the words sounding like something from a movie. The driver, a grizzled man who had probably seen it all, just nodded and pulled into traffic. The chase through the nighttime streets of Chicago felt surreal. She had no idea where they were going. To this woman's apartment? A hotel? Each possibility was a fresh stab of pain. But the Audi didn't head towards any of the city's residential high-rises. Instead, it turned onto a street near the medical district and pulled up in front of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The woman got out, waved a casual goodbye to Mark, and walked briskly up the steps and into the building. She worked there. Chloe's mind raced, trying to make sense of this bizarre twist. Chloe told the taxi driver to take her home, asking him to use a different route so she'd arrive before Mark. When he finally walked through the door, hours later, he was humming a cheerful tune, the picture of innocence. "Hey, honey! Sorry I'm so late. Brutal day," he said, loosening his tie. "I'm exhausted. You wouldn't believe the numbers we were crunching." Chloe looked at him, her face a neutral mask that concealed the hurricane of emotions within. "You must be," she said, her voice flat. She couldn't bring herself to confront him. Not yet. He would just lie again, twist the story, and make her feel like she was crazy. She needed more than just a suspicion. She needed undeniable proof. She needed to know who that woman was. The next day, after dropping Lily at school, Chloe drove back to the hospital. She carried the only weapon she had left, her camera. She sat in her car across the street, her long focus lens pointed at the entrance, waiting. It was an old instinct from her journalism days, the patient stakeout, the hunt for the one image that tells the whole story. After a 2-hour wait that felt like an eternity, she saw her. The brunette from the cafe emerged, now dressed in blue scrubs, laughing with a colleague. Chloe's finger flew to the shutter. The camera's click, a satisfyingly sharp sound in the quiet car. She took a dozen photos, zooming in on the woman's face and her hospital ID badge. The name was clear. Jessica Riley, RN. A registered nurse. Now she had a name and a face. A quick search on her phone revealed more. Jessica Riley was a neonatal nurse, a nurse who worked with newborns. A cold, unsettling feeling began to creep up Chloe's spine. Why was Mark meeting with a neonatal nurse? It made no sense. Unless it had something to do with the past. With Arthur. The thought was so absurd, so monstrous, that she immediately tried to push it away, but it lodged in her mind like a splinter of ice, a chilling, impossible connection that she couldn't ignore. The affair was one thing, a painful but common betrayal. This felt different. This felt darker. Armed with a photo of Mark and Jessica at the cafe, Chloe scheduled an appointment with the hospital's head of nursing, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Albright. "I believe one of your nurses is having an affair with my husband," Chloe began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I thought you should be aware of her unprofessional conduct." She slid the photo across the polished desk. Mrs. Albright looked at the picture, her expression unreadable. "Jessica Riley is an excellent nurse," she said coolly, "but her private life is her own business, unless it impacts her work." The woman's gaze then fell on Chloe, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Wait a minute, I know you. You're Chloe, Mark's wife. The Matson case 5 years ago. I remember. We were all so sorry for your loss." The mention of her son's death felt like a physical shock. "Yes," Chloe whispered, her throat suddenly tight. "My son Arthur died here." Mrs. Albright nodded sympathetically. "Such a tragedy. As for Jessica, I'll speak with her. I can't promise anything, but I don't approve of my staff being involved in messy situations." Chloe left the office feeling hollow. What had she hoped to accomplish? A warning to Jessica? It felt petty and pointless now, especially with the ghost of her son suddenly filling the room. As she was walking through the hospital's sterile corridors, a wave of grief washed over her. This was the place where her life had irrevocably broken. She found a small secluded courtyard to catch her breath, sinking onto a cold stone bench. Through an open window on the ground floor, she heard a familiar voice. It was Jessica, speaking on the phone. Chloe froze, pressing herself against the brick wall, out of sight. "Mark, calm down. Your wife was just here," Jessica said, a hint of amusement in her tone. "She thinks we're having an affair. It's almost perfect." There was a pause as she listened. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing. She came to my boss, trying to get me in trouble." Jessica laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "What's she going to do? Look, the director recognized her. It was a risk. But it's fine. He's not going to say anything. He was paid well enough to keep his mouth shut. She still thinks her precious son is dead. As long as she believes that, we're safe. What if she figures it out? Don't be ridiculous. How could she? The paperwork is perfect." The world stopped. The words echoed in the small courtyard, each one a hammer blow against Chloe's heart. She still thinks her precious son is dead. The air rushed from her lungs. It couldn't be true. It was a nightmare, a cruel hallucination. Her son, Arthur, alive? The man she loved, the father of her children, had lied to her about the death of their own baby. The betrayal was so immense, so soul-crushingly absolute, that she couldn't process it. She stumbled away from the window, her body moving on autopilot, her vision blurred, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. He had let her grieve for 5 years. He had held her while she cried for a child who was alive. He had stood with her at an empty grave. The monstrousness of the lie was beyond comprehension. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, her own history, was a lie. She made it back to her car, her body trembling uncontrollably. She didn't know how, but she was going to find out the truth. And then she was going to burn Mark's world to the ground. Chloe felt like she was drowning. The truth was too vast, too horrifying. She needed an ally, someone on the inside. She remembered a kindly older nurse who had been with her during those dark days 5 years ago, a woman named Brenda. With some effort, she found her working in the hospital archives, a quiet, forgotten part of the building. With tears streaming down her face, Chloe recounted the conversation she had overheard. Brenda listened, her kind face growing pale with shock and dawning horror. "The Matson baby," Brenda whispered, her eyes wide. "I remember that. The doctors said he had a severe birth injury, that he likely wouldn't survive, or would have profound disabilities if he did. Your husband, he was the one who signed all the paperwork. He told everyone you had agreed to sign a do not resuscitate order and relinquish custody if the worst happened. We all thought you were in shock, too grief-stricken to handle it yourself." The pieces were starting to fall into place, each one more terrible than the last. He had made the decision for her, behind her back, while she was weak and vulnerable. "But the baby didn't die, did he?" Chloe pressed, her voice trembling. Brenda shook her head slowly. "No. I heard the attending physician arguing with the chief of staff. The boy's condition stabilized. He was weak, but he was a fighter. Since the relinquishment papers were already signed, he became a ward of the state. He was transferred to a transitional care facility before being placed in foster care. Brenda's daughter, it turned out, worked for the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. A few discreet calls later, the story was confirmed. A baby boy, born on September 5th, 5 years ago, relinquished by his father, Mark Matson. He was considered a special needs placement initially, but as months went by, he hit all his developmental milestones. He was a perfectly healthy, bright little boy. A medical miracle, the file said. Or more likely, a case of a terrible misdiagnosis, covered up by a corrupt doctor and a desperate father. The child was adopted 2 years later by a couple named Maria and David Miller. Maria had passed away from cancer a year ago. David Miller, the tired, hostile man from the park. Leo, the little boy with the shock of blonde hair and the infectious laugh. It was him. It was her son, her Arthur. The realization hit Chloe with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. He was alive, and she had met him. She had felt that inexplicable pull, that maternal connection, without even knowing who he was. The universe, in its own cruel and mysterious way, had led her right to him. Now she needed proof, not just for herself, but for the war she knew was coming. The next afternoon she found Leo in the park again. "I brought you some bubble mix," she said, her voice shaking slightly. As he played, laughing as the iridescent spheres floated into the air, she gently wiped a smudge of dirt from his cheek with a tissue. "You've got a little something there, sweetie," she murmured, her heart aching with a love so fierce it almost overwhelmed her. She carefully placed the used tissue into a small plastic bag in her purse. It felt clinical, and it broke her heart, but she knew it was necessary. It held the key to everything. The 10 days she waited for the DNA results were the longest of her life. She moved through her days like a phantom, her conversations with Mark stilted and brief. The wall between them was now a chasm, vast and uncrossable. He seemed to sense the shift, watching her with a new, wary suspicion. He knew something was wrong. Finally, the call came from the lab. She drove to the clinic, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. The technician handed her the sealed envelope with a professional, detached air. Chloe ripped it open. She scanned the jargon-filled pages, her eyes searching for the one sentence that mattered. There it was, in black and white. The probability of maternity is 99.999%. It was official. Leo was her son. Arthur. Tears of grief and joy and rage streamed down her face. He was hers, and he had been stolen from her. The time for sorrow was over. The time for a reckoning had begun. That night, she waited for Mark in the living room, the DNA report lying on the coffee table between them like a weapon. "What's this?" Mark asked, his voice laced with annoyance as he walked in. He tossed his briefcase onto a chair. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way I have," Chloe said, her voice dangerously calm. "I found our son, Mark. I found Arthur." She watched his face. The colour drained from it, replaced by a sickly grey pallor. For a moment his carefully constructed composure shattered, revealing the panicked man beneath. He looked at the report, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "How?" he whispered, sinking onto the sofa. "That's not important," she said, the cold fury in her voice making him flinch. "What's important is that you tell me why. Why did you tell me our son was dead? Why did you let me mourn him for 5 years while he was alive, living with strangers?" He tried to regain control, to spin a new web of lies. "The doctors said he would be a vegetable, Chloe. They said he would ruin our lives. I did it for us. For Lily, to protect our family from a lifetime of suffering." His voice was pleading, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "You didn't protect me," she shot back, her voice rising with every word of his twisted justification. "You destroyed me. You made a decision that wasn't yours to make. You decided I wasn't strong enough to love my own son no matter what. He's not a vegetable, Mark. He's a beautiful, perfect little boy. And you threw him away like he was nothing, like he was a bad investment." The argument escalated, their voices echoing in the sterile, silent condo. It was a storm of accusations, of lies unravelling, of 5 years of suppressed pain erupting in a torrent of rage. He saw that he couldn't manipulate her any more. His tone shifted from pleading to threatening. "You will not ruin my life over this," he snarled, his face contorted with fury. "That boy has a family. You will stay away from him. If you try to do anything, I will make you regret it. I will take Lily, and you will never see her again. You're a housewife with no job and no money. A judge will see you for what you are, an unstable woman. You will be left with nothing." The next morning, while Lily was still asleep, Chloe packed a small bag. She knew she had to leave. The condo, once a symbol of success, now felt like a prison. But before she could go, Mark came home. He wasn't supposed to be there. "I know you were planning to run," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "And I know you went to see his adoptive father." He must have had her followed. The thought made her skin crawl. "You're not going anywhere." "But Lily is." He went into Lily's room and woke her up. "Get dressed, sweetie. We're going on a little trip, just you and me." Lily, confused and sleepy, looked at her mother with wide, frightened eyes. "Mommy, what's happening?" "Don't you dare, Mark," Chloe pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this to her." "You left me no choice," he said coldly, pulling a suitcase from Lily's closet. He ushered their crying daughter out the door, leaving Chloe alone in the vast, empty apartment. He had taken her son, and now he had taken her daughter. She had never felt so utterly alone, so completely defeated. Chloe's world had been reduced to rubble. She sat on the floor of Lily's silent room, surrounded by her daughter's toys, and wept. An hour later, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered, expecting to hear Mark's triumphant voice. Instead, it was the man from the park, David. "I saw what happened," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I was walking to my office and saw your husband forcing your daughter into his car. He was yelling at you. I heard him call the boy I heard what he said. I think we need to talk. I think you were telling me the truth." He had seen everything. He had heard Mark disown his own son. In that moment, a tiny flicker of hope ignited in the darkness. She wasn't entirely alone. She agreed to meet him, her mind numb with grief, but clinging to this unexpected lifeline. They met at a small, anonymous coffee shop far from her neighbourhood. She told him everything. The whole sordid, unbelievable story. The lies, the hospital, Jessica, the DNA test, Mark's threats. She laid her broken life out on the table before him. David listened patiently, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock, and finally to a quiet, simmering anger. I never knew the full story of his birth, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. The agency just said he was a medical relinquishment. My wife, Maria, she fell in love with him the moment she saw him. He was our son in every way that mattered. He looked at Chloe, his eyes full of a pain she understood all too well. I can't imagine what you're going through. First losing him, and now finding him only to have your daughter taken away. He paused, taking a deep breath. My mother lives with us. It's a small apartment, but you can't go back to your home. You can stay with us. For now. We'll figure this out. Together. The offer was so unexpected, so kind, that it brought fresh tears to Chloe's eyes. A man who, just days ago, had looked at her with pure hostility, was now offering her sanctuary. She had lost her home, but maybe, just maybe, she had found an ally. Living in David's small Logan Square apartment was a world away from her Lincoln Park condo. It was cramped and filled with the comfortable clutter of a real, lived-in home. David's mother, Helen, was a warm, no-nonsense woman who treated Chloe with a gentle kindness that soothed her frayed nerves. And then there was Leo. Being near him every day was both a joy and a constant aching pain. He was her son, but he didn't know it. He called her Chloe and treated her like a fun new friend. She helped him with his alphabet blocks, read him bedtime stories, and watched him sleep, memorizing the shape of his face, the way his blonde hair fell across his forehead. She saw so much of herself in him. During the day, while David was at work and Leo was at preschool, Chloe began to rebuild her life. She reached out to her old editor at Chicago magazine. I have a story for you, she said, a very personal one. Then she called David. You're a programmer, right? I have an idea. It's a long shot, but I think I know how to find Mark's weakness. David was a brilliant software engineer. Working late into the night, he used his skills to do what Chloe had asked. He found a back door into the servers of Mark's development company. What he discovered confirmed Chloe's deepest suspicions. Mark wasn't just a liar in his personal life. He was a crook in his professional one. He was running a massive scheme, using shell corporations and falsified invoices to embezzle millions from his own investors. It was all there, in meticulously kept secret ledgers, an intricate web of white-collar crime. Chloe felt a grim satisfaction. This was the leverage she needed. Mark had built his empire on a foundation of lies, and she was about to pull the cornerstone. She anonymized the data and sent the entire package to the US Attorney's Office and the IRS. The gears of justice began to turn, slowly but surely. While the federal investigation began, her story, carefully edited to protect Leo's identity, was published in the magazine. It was a raw, powerful account of a marriage built on deception, and it made waves throughout the city. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. News of the federal investigation into Mark's company broke, and combined with the magazine article, his reputation was shattered overnight. His assets were frozen. His partners deserted him. He was a pariah. The power he had wielded, the power he had used to threaten her, was gone. Suddenly, Chloe wasn't the unstable, unemployed housewife anymore. She was a woman who had been grievously wronged, a compelling victim in a high-profile scandal. The magazine, impressed by her courage and the impact of her story, offered her a full-time position as a photojournalist. For the first time in years, she had her own career, her own income, her own power. Lily, who Mark had hidden away in an expensive boarding school in Wisconsin, managed to call her from a friend's phone. "Mommy, please come get me," she sobbed. "I miss you." "I'm coming, sweetie," Chloe promised, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise everything is going to be okay now." The divorce and custody hearing was a formality. Mark, facing federal indictment and public ruin, was in no position to fight. He sat silently, a ghost of the powerful man he once was, as the judge granted Chloe a swift divorce and sole custody of Lily. As they were leaving the courtroom, Mark stopped her. "I'm sorry, Chloe," he mumbled, his eyes hollow, but she could see no real remorse in them, only the bitterness of a man who had lost. "Sorry doesn't fix what you did, Mark," she said. turning her back on him for the last time. That afternoon, she drove to Wisconsin and picked up Lily. The reunion was a flood of tears and tight hugs, a healing of a wound that should never have been inflicted. Driving back to Chicago, to their new uncertain life, Lily looked at her mother. "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" she asked. Chloe met her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror and smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Yes, baby," she said. "We're going to be better than okay." The federal case against Mark moved quickly. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he took a plea deal. But during the sentencing, the story of his first, most profound crime came to light. Jessica, implicated in the hospital cover-up, confessed to everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. The courtroom was silent as she detailed the plot to fake a baby's death, to manipulate a grieving mother, all orchestrated by the man she had been obsessed with for years. The judge, appalled by the moral depravity of the act, made it a factor in his decision. Mark was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. As part of a civil settlement, Chloe was awarded the Lincoln Park condo and a significant portion of his remaining non-fraudulent assets. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just a concept. It was real. She sold the condo immediately, wanting to erase every last trace of her old life. With the money, she bought a beautiful 3-flat building in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. She also opened a small, independent photo studio, a place that was truly her own. She didn't tell Leo the truth right away. He was only 5, and his world had already been upended enough. For now, it was enough that she was a constant, loving presence in his life. She and David, brought together by crisis, found a deep, quiet love growing between them. A love built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. They moved into the new building together, creating a new, blended family. Lily adored having a little brother, and Leo blossomed under the love of a mother, a father, and a big sister. One sunny afternoon, a year later, Chloe was in her studio, developing photos from a wedding she had just shot. David came in with Leo and Lily. Leo ran up to her, holding a drawing he had made. It was a picture of the 4 of them, stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. At the top, he had written their names, David, Lily, Leo. And next to her own stick figure, he had carefully printed the word Mom. Chloe's eyes filled with tears as she pulled him into a hug. The past was a landscape of scars, but the future, finally, was a picture of hope, a family rebuilt from the ashes of a terrible lie, stronger and more beautiful than before. In the end, Mark's empire of deceit collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. But more importantly, a family was forged not by blood alone, but by truth, resilience, and the profound courage to heal. Chloe, once trapped in a gilded cage, found her freedom not through revenge, but by reclaiming her identity and her children. Her camera, once a reminder of a life she'd lost, became the tool she used to frame her new beginning. Her greatest tragedy became her greatest strength. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible story. If it moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And I want to leave you with a question. Do you believe some betrayals are simply unforgivable, or is there always a path to a new beginning?